Welcome to the Week Ahead, a podcast by SBM Intelligence. I'm your host, Veronica Pana Igube. Every Friday, we explore stories that are shaping the African continent. Last week, SBM Intelligence published its quarterly Jollof Index. The index told a tale of two economies. In Nigeria, food prices dipped slightly despite long-term issues, while despite some stability in Ghana, food prices rose slightly, especially in the northern region. What is happening there? Ghana produces inflation fell sharply to 3.2% in September 2025 from a 30.5% a year earlier, showing reduced production costs and economic stability. However, the government's treasury bills auction missed its target by 30%, signaling weak investor confidence even with stable returns. Why are investors turning away from Ghana's treasury bills despite signs of easing inflation? Cameroon faces rising unrest after the court upheld President Paul Biya's eight-term victory, rejecting opposition's petition and prompting deadly protests. Internet access has been cut, rising censorship concerns. How might the internet blackout affect public trust and political stability in Cameroon? Joining us today for further insight is Kofi Isaac Agai, our correspondent from Ghana. Thank you, Kofi, for joining us and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Eva. Great to be here.
Hi, let's just jump to our first story where we talk about the Jollof Rights Index. Kofi, the latest index shows a slight dip in food prices in Nigeria despite persistent structural challenges. While in Ghana, we are seeing a different trend with prices rising in the north. Can you explain for us like why this disparity and why we're having a difference from the northern part of Ghana and the other regions?
Right. Jollof is always an interesting battleground between Ghana and Nigeria. But in terms of price, and the reason why we are seeing disparity in Ghana's price and a slight upwards adjustment in the Jollof Index is simply because of what is going on in the middle belt of the country. So if you look at the middle belt of Ghana and the western parts of Ghana, these are actually the food banks of the country. And unfortunately, this part of the country has also been turned or have been in sites where everywhere. So if you take a middle belt region like the Ashanti region, which has the second most populous city, which is Kumasi. If you take the western part of the country, and then also certain aspect of the central part, you see illegal mining taking over farms, and that has also contributed to the kind of upward adjustment we saw in the Jollof Index. And because of that, this affecting food prices also in the northern part of the country. And basically, you saw, the third quarter of 2025, not so good, although the city throughout the year has appreciated by year to date about 37%. The third quarter saw the biggest depreciation in terms of quarter on quarter analysis. The third quarter also almost an outlier, and that also contributed to the rise in food prices and also the Jollof Index the rise in the Jollof Index that we saw for the third quarter. So simply because of illegal mining activities where illegal miners are now taking over farmlands and which is affecting supply. And then also you have the city depreciation in the third quarter, which definitely affected, the cost of transport and then also The fact that you have the middle belt of the country also feeding the northern part of Ghana. If prices are expensive in the middle belt, definitely prices will be expensive in the northern part of the country.
Okay, so do you think that, I mean, looking ahead, do we expect that these trends will continue into the next quarter, or do you think we're likely to see a different shift as well? And what other key findings did you do you feel like you want to highlight from the index as well?
Well, looking forward, illegal mining still remains a big threat to Ghana's food security. But in the short term, looking at the last quarter of the year, things are expected to actually ease, where year-to-date appreciation of the cedi is now around 37%. The projection is that the last quarter of 2025 is expected to yield massive appreciation. And for the first time since redenomination in 2007, the cedi is on course to record a net appreciation by the end of this year. And that strong, outlook of the cedi is now offsetting threats of, transport fares, and that is a good or a positive, signal for the last quarter of the year. And then also fuel prices. This year, fuel prices have been very, very stable. The projection is that we are about to enter the next, pricing window, and fuel prices are expected to fall by at least 10%. All of this will have a pass-through effect in terms of the prices that we possibly will see in the last quarter and maybe the first quarter of 2026. And so looking forward in the short term, things are expected to ease because of the strengthening of the cedi against the US dollar. And then also the fact that you have fuel prices expected to go down significantly in the upcoming window. This we project could affect food prices, especially in the middle belt, and that could ease the pressure we are seeing in the northern parts of the country, and also the middle belt as well. So short term, things look very positive, but long term, illegal mining is still posing a big threat to the food security of the country.
I mean, you highlighted that, mining activities, illegal mining activities is hampering and affecting food production. Is the government taking any steps at this moment to address that? And if they are not, what recommendations do you feel like they need to take to be able to fight against illegal mining?
Well, obviously, the government isn't sitting out idle, but the measures put in place at the moment haven't yielded significant, outturn in the sense that you have government going after illegal miners and arresting and destroying their equipment. But weeks and days after, uh, tax forces, combined tax forces from the military and the police are done with their operation to see illegal miners going back again to start operation. And in fact, if you look at price of the rising price of gold, that has also made it difficult for people to gold is becoming more and more attractive, and government itself is also benefiting from what they call the nationalization of small scale gold export inflows, which is being used to strengthen the cedi against the United States dollar. And so that in itself also ties the hands of government and makes it difficult for government to have that political will to fight illegal mining from the roots. And so although you may have pockets of measures currently in terms of consolidation, this has not been able to yield any form of positive impact where illegal miners definitely they go back to site even if they have their sites raided by tax forces days, weeks, and sometimes months after they go back and they start operating. And simply because gold prices are rising, it's become difficult for miners to stop and government as well to stop this menace.
Yeah. True. I get your points as well that you've raised. Let's move on to our second story, which is very interesting because we're seeing that Ghana's producer inflation has dropped dramatically, which is a positive sign for the economy, by the way. Yet, investor appetite for treasury bills seems to be weak. What do you think is behind this contradiction that we're seeing between the two?
Well, so in Ghana, if you want to look at the direction of consumer price index, which is consumer inflation, you definitely would have to check the direction of producer price index, which has been in single digits. I think from the start of the year, before even consumer inflation assumed single digits. Last month. So that in itself tells you that short term, Ghana is expected to maintain its single digit inflation status maybe until the second quarter of next year. But if you are tying this in with the treasury bill market, which since the beginning of the year has been tanking, it's simply because of the stance of the current John Dramani Mahama administration, where uh, the government has been very, very tight in terms of their fiscal expenditure. They are trying to keep fiscal discipline. And so you have governments reducing its demand for short-term, debt like 91-day treasury bill and what have you. And so just because government has dropped its demand for this short-term T-bill rates, you also have, prices or the interest rate dropping. So when we started the year, treasury bill interest rates were as high as 27, 30%, but now we are talking about below 15 and 14%, right? That simply will tell you that because of the drastic decline in the rates, investors will no longer see treasury bills as a lucrative investment. But in fact, this does not mean that investors are losing confidence in Ghana, because obviously, even if you look at the international space where Ghana lost access to the bonds market, just this year, the country has received more than two upgrades from Fitch and then also from S&P and Moody's, all upgrading their sovereign bond, ratings. What is happening here in the local space is that government is trying to reduce its presence in the short-term market. The treasury bill market. And this is the reason government is hoping to start the reissuance of local bonds, right? Remember that the local bond market collapsed when the government did domestic deficit program in 2023. So they are hoping to start issuance this year. And definitely, if you want to issue bonds that have become very, very, risky, you would want to give investors a higher coupon. That's why government is dropping the rate for treasury bills and possibly raising the coupon rate for bonds, which will definitely be higher than that of treasury bills. And by doing this, government will then have that fiscal space to hold long-term debt instead of holding 91 days and 180 something days and what have you. With the introduction of these new bonds, government will then have the chance to hold long-term bonds from 2 years and above. So it's a strategy by government to reduce its presence in the short-term market, not borrow and get trapped in the short-term market, but also looking at ways and means that it can use relatively attractive coupon rates in the long-term market, local bond market, to be able to attract investors in that space. So that what is happening is a strategy. It doesn't simply mean that investors are losing confidence in the Ghanaian economy. It's just a strategy of government to get debt from the long-term market rather than maybe the short-term market.
It's interesting to hear the strategy that the government is taking as well. And you mentioned that, they're going to try to push out local bonds. What are your thoughts? Do you think that Ghanaians will, key into the local bonds as much as the government would want? Or do you think they're going to shy away a bit to just, observe the government and, maybe later on they would, buy into that?
Well, government itself and maybe the IMF, they are all aware that investors having government hasn't regained 100% of the confidence that investors had in them. It's building, but I mean, we are not there yet. We are not at the level of, let's say, 2021 and 2020. So what you simply would do is that if you want investors to come on board, you don't issue long-term bonds that are so long, right? And so that is why the advice from the IMF is that start from 2 years and build up. Don't start from, let's say, 5 years and 10 years. Because of the risks attached to government at the moment, investors would always look for short-term, securities than long-term. That's why the advice is that start from 2 years, because with 2 years, even though the investor may attach a certain level of risks, they are assured that in 2 years they will be able to get back their principal and then their coupon. And so what government is using to attract investors into this long-term market is to issue bonds that do not have very long maturity dates. And so the advice is that, well, if you start from 2 years, you'll be able to attract investors.
Cool. Excited to see how it goes on. Onto a final story, where we're seeing protests erupting after President Paul Biya's court victory. Internet access has also been cut out. What are your thoughts on this? A lot of people have criticism, especially the people of Cameroon, for Paul Biya has stayed for a very long term. He's on his eighth term. What do you think is driving the anger and the unrest now? And the government's decision to cut off internet access is a rising global concern as well. How might this move affect, communications, business, and even public trust in the state institution? Obviously, there will be definitely people who buy into Paul Biya's government, and there will be people who are against it in Cameroon. And I'm talking about the electorate here at this point. But cutting off the internet and the rising political tensions, what are your thoughts on what's happening in Cameroon?
Well, it's interesting. It's the same playbook almost every elections cycle in Africa. Same thing happening in Ivory Coast. It's the same thing happening in Cameroon, just that this time around there's violence attached to it. I'm not surprised. This is the same old playbook being used by all, should I say, leaders who would massage the constitution to get additional terms and all of that. And the playbook is always the same. It's either you ban people from having protests, you arrest people, mass arrest, you cut internet, and sometimes even if you are lucky, electricity is also cut. So this is something that is not new in Africa. It's the same. Template has been used by other, leaders who are power hungry, and so I'm not surprised that Cameroon is also going on the same, tangent. And it's not even new in Cameroon. It happens almost every election cycle since Poppy actually became, president. And you can see the same template in Ivory Coast, where Alhassan Ouattara had to ban or had to actually disqualify opposition. Candidates who possibly he thought may have a certain strong capacity to maybe challenge him. And many have said that even if you look at what happened in Ivory Coast, it wasn't an election, it was a coronation, right? It's the same thing in happening in Cameroon. For public trust, I don't think that at the moment there is any form of public trust among discerning Cameroonians, right? Where a lot of people are not happy with the system, and the fact that even after the elections you see protests ongoing tells you that people are not happy. And unfortunately, this will leave a big scar on the country, and maybe until Paul Biya decides to say that maybe enough is enough, he's not going to contest anymore. Um, it will be difficult for the people of Cameroon to accept that this is what they get as democracy, right? It's unfortunate that this is how democracy is being defined in Cameroon. In Ivory Coast, for instance, the reason why Abidjan is relatively peaceful is simply because it's not been long since they had civil war, right? So the scars are very fresh in their minds, and so that's why Ivorians would choose peace over, let's say, violence or protest at the moment, because they've learned to be patient, and in fact, even though they may not like the fact that Al-Hassan Ouattara has won power again, Ivorians are taking solace in the fact that, well, we have two options. If you stay calm and patient, you get a chance to vote again. If you go out there and protest and riot, there's high likelihood that you press on existing fault lines, and the deadly effects of the civil war they had some years ago may come back, and that is what is holding people back in Ivory Coast. But in Cameroon, things are a bit different, where voters or a certain section of the population still feel that they can use protests and what have you to actually point out to the world that the election that happened wasn't free and fair. But the bottom line is, this playbook looks like it is something that has come to stay, with dictators in Africa is being the same old book almost everywhere, and African leaders are not tired of using this book. They always get away with it, and I'm not surprised.
I mean, I agree with you. Last week on the podcast, we spoke about the Ivory Coast story as well. And the guest we had, just kept on repeating it's the playbook. I mean, like you said, first you shut down the internet, you block your opposition, you stop protests. I mean, it's kind of like a playbook that keeps going on, and we see different African leaders, using this playbook. But hopefully we get internet restored back and we see the situation, we observe the situation that would happen in Cameroon as well. Thank you, Kofi, for joining us on today's episode. It's always a pleasure
It's
having you on the
always a
podcast.
pleasure to be here.
Yeah. And to our listeners, this podcast is by SBM Intelligence. You can access our podcast by searching for SBM Intelligence anywhere you find podcasts. For deeper insights into our work, you can visit our website. And to read about the Jollof Index, you can also check our website, sblintel.com. Remember to connect with us on all our social media platforms. You can find us on X, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Blue Sky at SBM Intelligence. That's all for today. Thank you for listening, and see you on the next episode.